Welcome back to 2023 kickoff of the preseason manager interviews with your co-commissioners, Brandon and Tim. We're welcomed by Ryan, our inaugural champ of the Brady Dynasty, to kick off the entire preseason manager interviews. Obviously one of the co-hosts for the upcoming draft week that we'll be having in Boston. Ryan, good to have you here.
Good to be here, guys. Good to be the first interview as well. I may also need to work on that Brady's third dynasty name with him no longer on my squad or the league in general. So we'll see.
It's exciting. It's good to see you. It's always good. You know, we got two champs with us now, so I'm feeling a little out of the loop here. Yeah, it's going to be a fun year.
Ryan, I'm excited to talk to you about the first season, second season. Let's talk about this past season and then your predictions and your thoughts on how your roster is sort of set up, what your goals are for the season. Let's go back for a moment. So 2021, first season, inaugural champ, and we move into 2022 and you were always one of the highest sort of contenders. I think, you know, you're set up to be a really strong dynasty for years to come. What were your thoughts on your 2022 season?
Yeah, so not where we wanted to end up. It was a fourth place finish coming back from the championship year. But I really wanted to focus on keeping a strong dynasty roster and not kind of try to sacrifice too much youth for another season. Not to say you get complacent, of course, but when you have that one title in the bag already, it doesn't feel as crucial to just keep going after it year after year. And in addition to that, we had teams such as yours, Tim, obviously, and Kyle and Eve, who I just thought were so much stronger week to week than my roster that I was fine where I was at.
What were your thoughts going into the 2022 season? And were you thinking about being a contender, or were you thinking about sort of making sure that you're making the appropriate changes for going long term? I think I remember chatting with you off season, and Tyreek Hill, you were just unsure about him, especially with the timeline that you want to build. Just want to get your thoughts on how you're composing the roster and how you thought the season went for you.
Yeah, I mean, going into last season, I was pretty good where I was at. The one concern with me, as you mentioned, Tyreek Hill, having Waddle as well. And then I had Jamar and T. Higgins. So it was kind of just a lot of wide receivers grouped together on two teams. I think I wound up making the right move and getting off of Higgins and keeping the Waddle Tyreek combo going because they seem to be pretty solid.
What were some of your overall memorable kind of impact moves? You kind of mentioned this already, but what are some of the things that might have been memorable for you just from the season in general?
Yeah, from the season in general, I think I weathered a decent amount of injuries last year. For me, it was really kind of waiting to see what Deshaun Watson was going to look like when he got back. Because Brady was clearly kind of regressing a little bit. Russell Wilson was god-awful, obviously. So it was kind of like, oh boy, I kind of need this guy to come back and be the QB1 that he once was. Kind of led to me, I don't know if it was a panic trade, but not one I would always make, the trade for Tua mid-season, just to try to stabilize that QB room a little bit. Wound up not really working out. You know, I think my rationale was that with Hill and Waddle there, and the teams I thought were better week to week than my roster, I figured I make the playoffs. Maybe the Miami offense just goes nuclear in the playoffs, and I wind up squeaking by again. So that was kind of the rationale there.
And then Ryan, what do you think the most memorable overall seasons, not your moves, but what were some of the things that you remember looking back at our 2022 season?
Well, Tim, I remember your team kind of distinctly, just kind of seeing all of your really young assets just sort of take off and start performing at elite levels and kind of thinking, oh man, we're kind of in trouble here. The league as a whole. So that's what kind of stuck out to me. I thought Eve had kind of a clear path to the championship last year. And then when Cooper Kupp went down, I think that really hurt his chances. I think he still pulls it out if Kupp is, healthy for the whole year. So I think kind of sucks to see an injury be one of the more memorable parts, but that's what kind of stuck out to me as far as keeping Eve down with no Kupps.
Two shots, no cup. And then let's maybe move into the season ahead. Ryan, you're obviously going to be co-hosting our first time as a group in Boston all together. We've obviously got great activities planned Excited to see everyone. What are your thoughts for the upcoming season? Let's start with how you're trying to construct your roster, your goals for the upcoming season.
Yeah, so I think moves I've made in the off season, to bolster my roster. I think the Travis Kelce trade kind of put me back into that more contender tier rather than just the we'll probably make the playoffs and we'll need a little bit of luck. I think that just really makes my roster really strong from, the wide receiver position all the way through the flex players. So it leaves kind of quarterback as my X factor position, if you will. I think as far as the moves I've made, they're far less exciting than our co-host Brandon here's moves. Just going in one season from a total teardown rebuild to now having just an incredibly stacked dynasty roster was something to see. I think that was kind of a crazy rebuild in 1 year type situation that's going to leave Brandon as a contender now for the next few years at least.
Well, thank you. I'll take any good words because last year there weren't too many of those for my team. So I'm savoring all of those. So I appreciate that. But you kind of mentioned it, and I definitely want to hit on this point, but your X factor for 2023, you mentioned your quarterbacks, and I think specifically Deshaun Watson is probably that guy. I know the opinions on him range across the board, whether he's going to, come back and be better than even before, or if he's not going to shake that rust and whatever. Talk to us a little bit about, your thoughts on Deshaun Watson. You have a good team, but you do need that production from him to round out your squad. So tell us a little bit about your thinking with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah. Well, the plan was kind of coming together as far as when we did the startup draft, drafting Brady, knowing that he was only going to be kind of a placeholder, and then drafting Watson a bit later than he obviously would have gone in a startup if he wasn't dealing with all the legal issues. So Brady's out, Deshaun's in. He looked horrible last year, so that's obviously the concerning part. I like to believe it's just chalked up to rust, and all the offseason reports are looking pretty good as far as that rapport he's building with the whole offense and stepping back into a sort of a leadership role. But like you mentioned, Brandon, that I kind of need him to come back and be sort of that top 10 fantasy quarterback, at least, I think, to really contend in this league for the next couple of years.
All the reports out of Cleveland are super positive. That's my thoughts as well. It sounds like they're a super analytical team, which is surprising just given their history. But yeah, good reports. You have the stack with Amari Cooper. I think that could, really reap some benefits there. Him getting Elijah Moore, I think, is an underrated move. So hopefully that helps his fantasy prospects as well. So yeah, sky's the limit for him, and they've obviously hitched their wagon to Deshaun Watson for the foreseeable future. So I think you and a lot of people in Cleveland are hoping that he's legit coming back this year.
Yeah, it's kind of like, those teams like Cleveland and Detroit and the Jets. It's like, they're supposed to be good, but I'll kind of believe it when I see it type thing because they've just been horrible our whole lives.
Exactly.
Right. I think from my just neutral, third-party standpoint, looking at your roster, as you've mentioned, your strength has been since day one. It still is today, even better than the startup draft, the strength at the receiver position. You're sitting with Waddle, you're sitting with Tyreek, you've obviously got Jamar Chase there. And at your flex, you've got Amari Cooper, and you've got a lot of other strength at the receiver position as well. And adding Travis Kelce, to your earlier point, I think it does really vault you into this. It's very clear what your path to contender looks like for me, right? You mentioned the quarterbacks. Deshaun, when he's healthy, before the rust, is a top 3 quarterback every single year. Top 3, top 5 quarterback, especially because he's so mobile. And the one thing that we didn't talk about is hopefully Russell Wilson last season isn't reflective that that's going to be how he's going to phase out for the rest of his career. But it was just a bad year for him in a new system and really a horrible coach, but he's got Sean Payton running the show now. And so hopefully he's going to be able to put into that system. And if Russell can be a solid, let's say even a top 12, so like a back end quarterback 1, which isn't crazy to think about with the weapons that he's going to have there, especially with another year of Chris Olave's development. That to me is like the clear path to Brady's third dynasty being a really, really scary contender for this upcoming year.
Oh yeah, we're keeping our fingers crossed for a Russell Wilson bounce back, but I think the trade with Eves to get Kirk Cousins was sort of insurance, at least for the next year or two. I think Cousins will put up good numbers, just having Jefferson and Hawkinson and those guys just throwing the ball a million times. And then back to the wide receiver point. A trade I made with Brandon a little while ago to acquire Jamison Williams, I think was kind of due in part to having such a strong wide receiver room right now. I felt like it was a little bit saturated and I could move off DK and go for just a kind of a home run swing. Obviously, Jamison Williams could just be a total bust, but I think his ceiling is really high. So kind of a risky move I was willing to make there.
Brandon, where would you put Ryan's? Obviously, he's top tier in the receiver slots, tight end number one in terms of contender. Anytime you have Travis Kelce on a roster, modern day NFL fantasy roster, you're always going to be TE1. Quarterback room, I mean, Ryan's talking about all these sort of holes, but even in the lower quartile of the outcomes that you can expect from Russell and Watson and Cousins, that still puts Ryan at the above median, like the league median by a mile, I feel like, with that depth that he's got.
I agree 100%. I think we see the kind of dearth of quarterbacks. It's hard to find those top tier guys. So it's pretty saturated at this point in our league. I'm higher on Kirk Cousins than I think a lot of people. I think he's he's not sexy. He's not fun if you're a quarterback on your team necessarily, but he gets the job done for fantasy purposes. So yeah, I would put this, I'm higher on these quarterbacks, I think, than most people. Yeah, so going into the 2023 season again, now that we have 10 teams in our league, I think we're all pretty excited about that, just to added competition. But that also means that 6 teams are now going into the playoffs. The way it's all situated now, the top 2 seeds headed into the playoffs get a first week bye. And I think we've seen with injuries, we've seen just with the competitiveness of this league, how important that could be just to get kind of through to the next round unscathed. Who do you think are, at this point, the most likely to be within those top 2 seeds in our league?
Ooh. I think it's going to be kind of a dogfight. I think Tim's obviously right back there. And I think Brandon, with your Mahomes and Hurts, just automatically, like any team who has those 2 quarterbacks is destined to be up there. You two, Kyle's roster is still super strong from just a week-to-week standpoint. And then John has obviously made a bunch of moves. Was it Cooper Kupp and Derrick Henry, maybe a couple other guys, to take him from that sort of middling roster to potential contender. If I had to get, I'd say Tim and Brandon, you two probably would be my guess for the top 2 seeds. Kyle wouldn't surprise me, though, because he's still got a strong team.
I think an interesting storyline for this season, something that we haven't seen so far in our 2 years, is Ryan as kind of an underdog. Your team has always been that front runner, and I think just hearing you not put yourself in that top 2 kind of sticks with me. It kind of frazzles. Just looking at your wide receivers and some of your depth, I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch this year, just seeing how your team performs, because it wouldn't surprise me at all to see you in the top 2 at the end of the year as well.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge to stay humble sometimes, Brandon, but we manage.
Well, when you look at that big trophy every day, I can understand that. Who wins it all this year? Do you have any overall predictions for us?
I'm going to go out. Maybe a controversy. I want to throw my money on Kyle because I think he needs it. I think he's got kind of the aging roster there that's built to win now, kind of like Eve last year is who I would have put my money on, just the person who probably needs it the most. I think you two and myself are probably set up for long-term success as well as potential titles this year, but I think Kyle just really goes after it.
Well, I'm going to kind of combine these last 2. Any fire controversial takes, anything that might surprise us for this year?
I think just looking at the rosters, the standings are almost, I don't know the particular order, but I think the playoffs are probably a little cut and dry as far as who's going to be in there. I think the race to the toilet bowl is going to be very interesting with the 2 expansion teams. obviously you're not starting in a good spot at that point, so you're just rebuilding right away. And then Sergey just doing a total teardown. So I don't who's like the number one, probably Caleb Williams or something next year. So who's kind of race to the bottom and get that foundational quarterback piece, I think is kind of just as much of a fascinating race as the championship.
It's a good take.
I think those are valid takes. Appreciate a lot of your thoughts on how your 2022 season played out, memorable stuff that you mentioned, but your overall predictions for this upcoming season. We're all excited about it. I want to leave sort of the sign off to you with any sort of message, advertisement, any call outs that you want to make to the other managers to sort of help with your goals for the season.
Well, it would be a wonder if Eve could, actually come through and beat me once. It's just, it's amazing that, how many times have we played? 5 times or something like that, including the playoffs. And he's probably had the stronger roster every time and just kind of cursed, I guess. Other than that, kind of need quarterbacks and running backs. So if you feel like putting them on the trade block, send some offers my way. I've got receivers and a horde of second-round draft picks that, might be willing to part with. I don't know how everyone else views second-round picks, but I've got a bunch of them.
I love chirping your own golf teammate. That's perfect.
It's just unbelievable, honestly.
So what's the all-time record between you two? Did Eve win once, or has he lost every 5 times?
I think it's 5. I think I'm 5-0.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And that rivalry, wow. That really was a rivalry to look at for the first 2 years. And with Eve tearing down his roster now, you might be running up the scoreboard for another couple of years until it starts to even out a little bit.
Yeah, sorry to call you out in particular, Eve, but that's just sort of what came to mind over the last couple of years.
Through all those Brady years, the Bills really wanted it to be rivals with the Patriots, but if you don't win any of the games, you can't really call yourself a rival. So
right,
that's what it feels like.
Ryan, it's been a joy to have you. Thanks for kicking this series off for us. We're looking to see you for the draft weekend. It'll be a fun week we get to spend together. And thank you again for co-hosting with Brad and John for Boston and making it all possible for us to get out in person this year together. But that does it for the first episode of the 2023 preseason manager interviews alongside predictions. It was a joy, Ryan, and best of luck to the Brady's third dynasty for this upcoming season.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. And like I mentioned before we started, I think I've got 9 holes coming up in a couple days, and hopefully get another round in to bolster Team Canada's chances in the tournament this year.